Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Tales from the Bridge. I'm Tristan.
Hi, I'm Marty.
Hey, this is Kevin.
And my name's Sam.
In this episode, we're talking about Arkady Martine's A Memory Called Empire. What a great book. I think everyone enjoyed this one again. We talk about some graphic novels. We get into The In-Call by Jodorowsky and other things, but for now, let's get to some science fiction, science fact. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
I do want to start with Sophia, our humanoid robot that we were discussing before. And Sophia, I love this story because one, I'll talk about it in just a second, but two, here is a humanoid robot that slightly augmented some art, and it was sold at auction for $688,000. And this is electronic art, and it was sold using these NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which is a blockchain-enabled mechanism for authenticating ownership. It's like a series of smart contracts, and this has really taken hold for folks who want to buy digital art. And so, an artist, I think it was an Italian artist, worked with Hanson Robotics, which is this robotics company that produces this Sophia humanoid robot, and they got the AI that happened to be installed inside of the processors of this humanoid robot to augment his art in some way. And so what it was is the first piece of art created by an artificial or partially created by an artificial intelligence in a humanoid robot. So it's astoundingly niche-y, and I would say that, and the only reason why and this is what I think is interesting, is why would anybody buy it for $688,000 US? Because AI has been creating art for years. Computer has been creating music. We've had all sorts of reasonably interesting art-like things coming from computers. So why did suddenly this one? And I think it really comes down to our need for anthropomorphizing things and our need for humanizing things, because Sophia looks like a human, I don't know what you guys think about that.
What is the art that she amplified? Like, did she do it somehow manually, or was it just sort of digitally in her head and she just took in a file and spit out a modified file? And
I think it's that. I think it's the latter. I don't know the ins and outs, but as far as I understand, she modified a portrait of herself.
You could probably Google that and see it. It's a self-portrait. To answer that question, well, it's difficult to answer that question on why it sold for that much, though. I wonder if this NFT thing is a fad, because there has been some art that has sold, some NFTs that have been sold for millions of dollars. There's one in particular by Beeple, I think his name was, but I think it was around $70 million. One of his pieces, one of his NFTs sold for.
It's madness.
So was that just a multi-billionaire who just thought I'm going to pitch in and give this NFT thing a go? Or is there a future for NFTs? And this is the beginning of seeing some sort of stamp on digital art. Something interesting about the NFT is this just was released recently. Tom Brady is a part of a new company who they're going to do NFTs, and they revolve around the purchasing of autographs. And that's seems smart to make perfect sense now, because now you're getting, if the celebrity chooses to authenticate 1,000 copies of their autograph, when you receive that to your computer or your email, you own that. That's yours. It actually can't go anywhere because it's an NFT on the blockchain. It's non-fungible. It's yours, and it's one of 1,000. I'm not sure if it's a fad or the beginning of something new.
I think it's a useful technology. I really genuinely think it is. I think that it is just like the democratization of trading with apps like Robinhood and Questrade and et cetera, very low fee trading, I think that you get mania. And so there's mania in trading of non-regulated intellectual property assets. And that this is one of those things. It's unregulated, and there's very low barriers to mania. And so I think we'll see high volatility until we start to see a lot of volume on these sorts of things. So right now it's very nichey. When it becomes less nichey, we'll probably see less volatility. Anyway, so yeah, that was an interesting thing. More interesting in my mind was the next iteration of hype around an Elon Musk property, and this is Neuralink. And remember in 2020, they inserted a chip inside of a pig's brain so that they could read neural activity from a pig while it was walking and try to detect, what brain signals are going to its legs when it's trying to walk. And that was really cool because nobody had ever done it with the same density that they did, like the more little tendrils of things going into the brain. But then just recently, they posted a video of a monkey, and this monkey has a tube in its mouth and it's staring at a screen playing Pong. And at first you think, wow, that's cool. There's a monkey sucking on banana smoothie through a straw, and it's playing Pong with a joystick. And the joystick's moving up and down, and the joystick's moving with the paddle, just like you would imagine. And then they zoom in on the joystick and they show that the joystick's not plugged in anymore. So it had been playing it with the joystick, and then they've been reading the brain waves, and they've been training the artificial neural networks or whatever they're using, deep learning capabilities, to understand the brain waves coming from the monkey when it tries to move its arm up or when it tries to move its arm down. And it was so accurate that when they finally in predicting it's in understanding the brain waves, that when they unplugged the darn thing, he just kept playing Pong, and just as accurately and just as well, until finally the monkey realized, I don't need this thing anymore, when he was able just to think about it. And then it got to the point that he just stopped using the joystick entirely. And yeah, unprompted from the folks who were like the monkey trainers. And of course, it disheartened me because I saw this monkey playing Pong better than I would with its mind.
It had some practice, to be fair. Probably
True.
Days or weeks or who knows. Its entire life for all we know.
Yeah. If I was being force-fed a banana smoothie every time I did well in Pong, I probably would get better at it too. Maybe.
I find that really interesting because I've always thought that it'll be really hard to do things just with your mind, even really simple things, because their minds are so noisy, right? Like I was like, oh, I'm driving a car with my mind, and then I got distracted, started thinking about what I had for dinner last night, and boom, it's all over. Like controlling your mind is really difficult, or at least focusing it, on a specific thing. I guess with a video game, that's probably the best example of something that holds your attention perfectly. But I don't know.
Well, with this monkey, I heard them say that it's the intention of moving the arm up. So it doesn't actually send the signals to the arm to move it up, because it actually stopped using the joystick, and then right. But it had the arm intention. So it was, assuming this is all true, like this is still a video. It could be falsified. I suspect it's not, but if it's not falsified, then the monkey learned that it's the intention of sending its arm upwards to be able to make it work. And so you can imagine the implications for things like sub-vocalizing. So right now I'm speaking to you, I'm making the words in my head and I'm saying them out loud, but I could also form those words and not say it. So I could sub-vocalize and type out a message, using my brain, assuming this was complex enough to understand vocalization capability. And that's pretty amazing if that comes about. But you're right. If your brain is clouded and you're thinking about 1,000 different things, I presume the way it would work would be it just ignores those parts of the brain that's not salient to talk or salient to your arm moving up and down. That'd be my guess.
Wow.
Brave new world.
Totally. Well, it seems like we might be 5-10 years away from walking into a room and thinking about the light turning on, and it does.
That is awaiting us in the future, right? Of like when you can control things with your mind, and people are going to do things accidentally so much, right? Like I don't know what it'll be. Turning lights on and off, there's only so much you can do, but just like
having a fight with your mind to turn the light off. I want like
Yeah.
you and your spouse, or like one wants the light off, one wants the light on.
Yeah.
Staring daggers at each other.
Beach read, we were talking about this earlier, Tristan, and I decided that one of the main criteria for a beach read is that the cover cannot be black. You can't have a black covered book and call it a beach read. It's got to be fun. It's got to be colorful. It's got to live on a beach. But there are certainly guilty pleasure reads that could have dark covers and live in places other than beaches.
Oh, I'm a sucker for them. For me, it is a light read, and yeah, it's not going to be too heavy. It's going to be kind of fun. It's going to be pretty. You burn through the book in a day if you really wanted to, type book, and it's still kind of a guilty pleasure too. And I say that because it's not something you brag about reading, right? So I really enjoy reading the Star Wars novels, right? But that's if I need a break and I want something light, kind of whatever, beach read, vacation read, or just maybe it's February and it sucks outside and I want something kind of fun. And so for me, the Alphabet Squadron was a series of books. He's just coming out with another one, actually, written by Alexander Freed. These are canon novels, so you can at least maybe add some legitimacy to your reading choice there if you want to.
So they're canon to the original trilogy?
They are considered. So you have like kind of off-brand Star Wars novels, and then you have like what's considered canon. I've only read the Alphabet Squadron and a couple other odd ones that, sort of whatever was available at the library at the time. And so I haven't read them faithfully and all the way through, but I tend to gravitate towards anything that's post Return of the Jedi.
Nice.
See, that just sounds like good science fiction to me. Like to me that would be fully on in that circle of good sci-fi to read. It could be guilty pleasure, it could be leaning towards that direction, but I would totally see that as something that falls right in our wheelhouse here.
Well, I think that's what identifies this category we're talking about, the beach read, guilty pleasure, because would one of these Star Wars books, no matter how amazing it is, how fun, how brilliantly written it is, would it win a Hugo? No, because it's called Star Wars and it's one of their books. And I think that's what kind of separates it. I have kind of my favorite is another big film franchise, and that's the Planet of the Apes. I've read multiple of their books. I can't say it's well written. It's good enough, but I absolutely loved it. Death of the Planet of the Apes, Andrew E.C. Gaska. No one's going to read this, but I'd love to talk to someone one day that has, and just be like, we did this together.
Wow,
right?
and it's a tome. I mean,
it's good. It's big.
200 pages max for a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, it's out there as well. So, yeah. But I think that's an important distinction. Do you tell people that you read the books, or do you just kind of read them?
Well, that's part. Well, it's interesting that's the guilty part, right? Like there's the pleasure part and there's the guilty part. The pleasure part, it's pretty clear, right? That from your examples, that it's about the world building, right? You like to be in this world. The Star Wars world is somewhere that you love. We've all been there. We spent parts of our childhood there. Same with Planet of the Apes, or I take great pleasure in going to certain worlds and being there. My example that I'm bringing to the table today for my guilty pleasure is that I'm rereading. I dug out my childhood comic book collection after watching The Falcon and the Winter Soldier that just came out, and so that TV series, it's the story of the new Captain America when the original Steve Rogers steps down, and it's a great story. And I happen to be like, that was right in the middle of my childhood. I was collecting comics through the 80s. I was buying, I was collecting Captain America. And so that was an amazing story that I took in at a young age. And it's actually a great story. It's actually pretty close to literature as standard superhero comics get, because it is the story of America, right? America tarnishing its own reputation by becoming a killer, really. And I mean, I'm not sure how much of that I got when I was a kid reading these, but certainly it's clear reading the comic books today. They're like, oh, this is an amazing metaphor for what's happened in the world geopolitically for the last 40 years. So I've been rereading. I just happen to have exactly that sequence, right, where John Walker takes over the helm of Captain America. Captain America sort of goes rogue and goes undercover, and he's sort of a criminal, and he becomes the captain instead. And it's been great. And I realized, like, the reason I'm taking such pleasure from it is it just takes me back to my childhood. Like, I read this when I was like 10 or something, and I would save my money and I'd go to the store and I'd, have that $1.25 to buy a comic book every week or every month. And I'm really glad I kept them. I got rid of a lot of my comics, and, I sort of kept the ones I thought would be valuable. And it's been super cool to dig them up, read the original story, compare to the story that's now been built into this, cinematic Marvel universe, and share it with my kids. Show the kids, like, I mean, we sort of laugh about it that, like, kids, be careful with these comics. One day you'll pay your mortgage with this, like, first issue Wolverine or this 350th issue of Captain America. And I doubt it'll ever happen because, well, I didn't keep my comics in that great condition. But who knows, man? With the world going the way it is, these comic books have entered popular culture and entertainment and cinema and all this so much now that
they're just going to be
value.
They're just going to be NFTs in the future.
Got to claim your non-fungible tokens.
Yeah.
My comics will be non-fungible tokens.
This month we read a memory called Empire, which is a 2019 debut novel by Arkady Martine, and it follows Mahit Desmar, the ambassador from Lazelle Station to the Texkalani Empire. So our hero Mahit is a junior diplomat from a station on the border of the Texkalani Empire, and she has to quickly engage in constant diplomatic maneuvering to protect her station's interests. And the book examines themes of cultural assimilation that feel very relevant for today. And the book does a great job of demonstrating the care of communication and cultural exchange that is required to navigate, one would assume, an alien empire. This empire is also the dominant culture in her sphere of understanding. Her station is essentially Canada to the United States. And she's
that's interesting. Yeah.
And she's aided by a pretty cool piece of tech called an imago that contains the memories of her predecessor, who was murdered. So you get some sleuthing action in there, which I was down with. And there's a lot of politicking and palace intrigue, which adds layers to the story. But this, for me, I mean, it got a little bit much at times. But this is an empire that's still expanding and engaging in all of the strategies that are required of any good empire to manufacture the consent of its populace. So there's a lot there that I quite liked. And it ends on this sort of tantalizing cliffhanger as an alien culture arrives on the scene that is truly alien to all involved and presents a real threat. And I've already started the next novel because I like this one so much, and it just came out in September, and it's called A Desolation Called Peace. And I've just read the intro, and it comes from the alien perspective and how they are viewing the humans, which sort of relates to what we were talking about earlier, about how in the Pride of Chinor, as it starts off from the perspective of these lionesses, as to the book kicks off with this really interesting and kind of scary way that the aliens view the Texkalani and humans. And I mean, it's ominous. They start off with calling them talking meat. So it's
they're made of meat.
Yes, that's right. And so for me, I like where it's going. I think with any big space opera, your first book is a big world building exercise, and this one does so, and with a lot of layers and depth. And if done right, like I feel the subsequent novels could be pretty amazing. So I'm pretty excited about where this could go. I was happy to sort of get through what is essentially the first chapter, right? Like of was hopefully a big series. And so I was willing to forgive the pacing and sometimes the bureaucracy almost of the writing, and for in the hopes that there's a payoff as we move on. And for me, The Expanse was sort of like that, where there was this, in the initial novels, the first two books were, to me, were kind of the weakest, and it really starts to pick up steam as the world gets bigger. But that you need for these space operas really require a big setup, and I thought it was a good setup that was still readable. I got through it quicker than I normally do, and I found myself staying up too late as reading it, and it's like 1 a.m. and on a Tuesday, and I'm like, I gotta like turn my book off and go to sleep.
Right.
So I still had a bit of that. So it's not necessarily a page turner, but I was still fully engaged. I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to what comes next.
Yeah, me too. So when I had read this, I'd read it before you told us to read it, and I remember going through it and saying, "Oh my gosh, this sounds amazing!" as I started reading it, and then I got in and it said, "It still sounds amazing, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere." And then, just like you said about the pacing thing, I realized that this is very intentional. The intentionality of the pacing is it's all about the characters, and it's all about getting the feel of the culture, the Tex Kalani imperialism, and the fact that our protagonist is an outsider, right? She's a barbarian. She's not she's not a civilized person, and by their definition, because she's not part of Tex Kalani, and and that was just fine, right? That's just the way it was. That's the way she has to live her life, Mahit Desmar, right? And I thought that was kind of neat. Then it starts to pick up near the end. There tends to be a little bit more action, more plot, and so the book seemed to me to be about developing these characters and the political intrigue, trying to sort out how these characters work together given power imbalances, and so they developed 3 Seagrass and 19 Nads and Yaskander, right, who is the Imago dude, the previous person who's in her head, and then at the end of the book, you're right, it's perfectly set up for subsequent ones where these characters are very well developed. Suddenly, there's this excitement going on with these aliens, and so we have this rapport built with these characters. Now, it took us a long time to get there. And that's not typically the type of book that I'm super into. But I thought the writing was phenomenal. Prosaic, amazing poetry. I love the fact that they communicated with poetry and that pop culture was poetry. That was kind of a neat add to have inside of them, right? Like, if you want to get a secret message out, let's write a poem and let's broadcast it over the airwaves, and people are going to talk about it and tweet about it, and they're the equivalent of social media. So some really neat ideas in there. And that this was her debut book. My gosh, that was pretty impressive.
Hey, and you guys know that this is a pen name, right? That's Arkady Martine is not her real name.
That's right. Anne Linden Weller is
there it is. Yeah, Anna Linden Weller. That's yeah.
And she's an American historian and city planner by trade.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I love the poetry aspect of this book, because it's just it's like it's the exact opposite of what we're living with right now, right? That the social media, the pop culture, the memes are the lowest common denominator, and they're just so sort of cheap and shallow often, and that and she's written this world where that is, everything is interconnected this way, but that it's truly high culture, right? That they've sort of built a culture that's intelligent, that's literary, that's artistic, subtle, witty, right? It's almost like it reminded me some of the scenes of like George Bernard Shaw kind of times, right? It's almost like court life. Well, it is court life, right? Like it's a courtesans and an emperor, and to move your way up in that social ladder, you have to be witty and intelligent, and but then she just took it that one extra level, that it wasn't just about wit and humor. It was about like poetry, the ability to sort of do this something sublime with language and with words. And that's just so rare. I've never seen that anywhere else. I mean, it was just such a fresh, something so fresh and rewarding to read.
Yeah, it was different, and the whole idea of using the poetry as a means of expression required that you needed to A, understand the poetry, B, remember it, and kind of understand the nuances of it to be able to bring it novelly into conversation. Did anybody ever see that Star Trek The Next Generation episode where Picard was stuck on a planet with this captain of this alien ship, and they had to figure out how to communicate, and the other guy only communicated through metaphors, and there was the Darmark Ontanegra. This I've seen T-shirts with this, so it's nerdy, but it's somewhat, people know about it. Anyway, that's what it reminded me of, is that you have to have all of this cultural context to be able to really have a good conversation with somebody. So yeah, like you said, totally high culture, a lot of intellectual thinking.
Yeah, I find I had to keep up. Like I had to, there was a couple times where she almost spoke for me. She said, like she was talking about Mahit was forming an idea, and as an idea that she was starting to gain an understanding of the bigger picture that of this intrigue that she was into and engaged in, and the author was speaking for me at all the right moments, where I was just getting a little bit confused. I was just having a little bit of hard time grasping what everyone's agenda was and what the sort of grand plan was. And she said that for me, and it made me feel better.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I don't have to reread this 4 times. She's almost telling me, you don't need all the details now. There's more to come. And it really connected me to the character. There's these key moments where I almost felt like the author's now speaking to me a little bit as well. And it really did hook me in and bring me through the drier parts that were sort of necessary and processy to get to, the next sort of piece of payoff, where as you figure out who's on her side, who's not, and what their plan is, and what the sort of grand master plan is, as we go through I don't want to do any spoilers, but as we go through the political upheaval that the book sort of steers you through in this sort of intrigue. And it's quite clever and really well done, and reminds me, it's just great to see talent writing and putting out really clever ideas, and reading that going, it's nice to be humbled anyways. And so that was part of the experience for me as well.
I couldn't get over the emperor character, because everybody loved him. Yskander had a romantic relationship with him, and 19 ads. They were just, I didn't like him, right? I felt like it seemed incongruous that he was such a revered and loved emperor. I don't know if anybody else sort of felt the same, but he was just this nasty old dude, really, in my reading of the book.
I feel the same in terms of like our natural feeling towards him as a character is, I think, correct, but it highlights the culture that they're in, that it is an empire, and
old empire that he had.
Yeah,
It's true.
well, and the part of the culture is revering the emperor, no matter who he is, and it's like the English feeling for their monarchy. We can't quite understand that. We're not part of that, right? They love their monarch because it's their culture is to love and respect a monarch, and that's where they come from. And so I kind of appreciated that. I think it might have even been intentional, right? That they made him this sort of, I wouldn't say sleazy, but like our natural feeling towards emperors is that they're horrible. They shouldn't have all that power. They shouldn't just get to do what they want. They shouldn't just be allowed, to, but they are. And it's part of the world that she's written, is that this is a really, I mean, I love the fact that she reached all the way back to, the Aztecs, for the basis of this culture, because it's old. It takes you back and like it's this alternate history. Oh, what if the Aztecs had taken over the planet and then become a spacefaring species, nation, culture, whatever it is. But it sort of, it just makes you sort of have to take that on faith, or understand that about them, that it's not the culture we're living in. It's not our world, right? It's an empire that has survived thousands of years at this point, and that's part of it.
Something about the storytelling I liked right from the start is when the Imago stopped working, so Iskander disappeared. I liked the suspense of knowing that he's probably coming back. There's no way you're going to finish this book without fixing whatever mechanism has gone wrong. But I really liked how we got to know a character without him being in the story. And I liked how she was always worried and searching for him. She was also a frail character who was very likable from the start. There was a part at the beginning when I think it's when she first meets 17 ads and three seagrass. She wants to be their friend so bad, and that immediately reveals something about Lascelles. And Lascelles was us, I think. I really felt like every time they called Lascelles, the people of Lascelles, barbarians, it felt like they were calling me a barbarian, because I related to Mahit so much. And Lascelles sounds like the humans that are so much closer to us, and made the world of being in the Tex Kalani so much more intimidating and scary. That they consider themselves to be so much greater than us. But I feel like we're okay. Like I feel like as a whole, sure, there's a lot of bad stuff that happens in the human race right now, but as a whole, we're pretty good. We do a pretty good job, I think. And I think that was a theme in here that really came out for me, at least, is to relate to the main character through her culture, the Lascelles culture, being so much closer to human culture today than the Texkalani, which are the most powerful, or so we think, the most powerful race or culture in the vicinity.
I thought it was really interesting what they did there, what she did with flipping our expectations, I guess. So the station, right, the Lascelles station, they were technologically more advanced, at least in the aspect of having imago technology, right? That the Empire didn't have that, in some, and it was necessary for this space station culture to create this to survive. And so, normally in a lot of sci-fi we read, and in our world today, right, we consider like, oh, advancement is technological advancement and scientific advancement, and that's what makes you more advanced than the next guys. Whereas it seems, right, she never seemed to describe Texcalanli culture as better, more powerful, or any of that, because they were more technological. They were more artistic in a sense, right? They were more cultured people. They achieved a sort of civilization, or created a civilization which was more refined, culturally, linguistically, literature, poetry, right? That's what made them better than everybody else. And presumably that, I mean, I'm sure that didn't win the wars that they needed to win. Like they were just bigger and stronger, had more resources, more ships, but they weren't smarter. I mean, they were smarter, but they were like artistically smarter rather than scientifically smarter. And that was really refreshing. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, because the station actually had a more progressive government.
Yeah.
And a higher level of technology, because they had to, right? Like born out of need, like 30,000 people floating on a homemade station, something they built, and versus the Tex colonies where they they're culture driven. They just got numbers, and you got enough guns, you're gonna be the influence, right?
And presumably, their power also came from their ability to assimilate. They just took the best of what they assimilated, and then they incorporated it so they could use it. And so they just kept sort of marching forward, taking the best of everybody around them. I guess it's a lot like Rome, right? That is what made Rome work. They kept expanding and absorbing and taking the best of what they found and using it.
Or like the Radich and Anne Leckie's books.
Right, yeah.
A lot of similarity with
a lot of similarities.
Yeah, totally noticed that. I also noticed some similarity with Neverness and the fact that pilots are extremely important, and then the poetry and the need for poetry.
Right.
That wasn't a huge part of Neverness as a whole, but at the end, when you meet the warrior poet, that aspect existed in a memory called Empire. There was something there for at least for me. I could have been looking for it myself, but it seemed like it makes me wonder, and I do this often when I read, where I'll read certain things that remind me of something else and wonder, did Arkady Martine read Neverness? Was she inspired by that? Did that affect the writing because of the similarity? Also, I'm sure she's read Dune. A lot of similarities there too. A lot of similarities with the just the names.
Harder to wrap your tongue around them.
Yeah.
The Texcalani was more poetic names, right? And that goes right back to the Mayans. Like I think they're this whole style of like a number and a flower. I think that is actually historically what a lot of the Mayan like the Mayan calendar is basically written that way in these sort of cyclical patterns.
Good pick, Sam.
Good pick.
Okay, I don't know how this is gonna go.
It's my favorite part.
It is an exciting part for sure. So the book we are reading this month is To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis.
Nice. Another female author. We're on quite a streak here, right? We've done Anne Leckie, and then Arkady Martine, and now Connie Willis. Connie Willis has won, I think, more Nebulas than anybody else, and she's won 10 Hugos, which when I read the article, it didn't say that was the most Hugos, but I think it's up there for short stories and novels. So she won for her first novel, I think, was what is it? Doomsday Book, which comes right before To Say Nothing of the Dog.
Yes.
Oh, this looks like
neither of which I've read.
It's a Hugo winner.
Oh, it is. Okay. To Say Nothing of the Dog?
To Say Nothing of the Dog and a Locust Award winner.
This book is fantastic. It might be one of my favorites because of how funny it was. There's about as much science fiction as Back to the Future, which is it's time travel, it's science fiction, but it's about the people, it's about the story and the consequences of time travel, which is fun to talk about. But there's not much science fiction because most of To Say Nothing of the Dog is based in the Victorian age.
I love Connie Willis. I mean, she's so well researched. Like I couldn't believe reading All Clear how, as far as I could tell, it was historically accurate to a T around the timing of the Blitz in London and the street names and what places looked like. And so I suspect that there's probably a bit of research into To Say Nothing of the Dog. And I too love British writing, humor, and if she attempted to make that happen, I'll be all over it.
Well,
Yeah.
I am definitely ready for some humor in our reading. Yeah, I think a funny book would be great because it's hard to find actually in sci-fi, and quite a relief sometimes. Yeah, I'm into it. I'm gonna try to read Doomsday Book while you're reading it, Tristan, and then I'm gonna
Right.
get To Say Nothing of the Dog.
Right.
That, and I have Blackout, which I've been meaning to read too, but it's a bit of a tome, so I'm just gonna try to read them in the order she wrote them.
And the Incal was a series. I realized just today that it was written in the early 80s, right? So this would have been from the like 80, 81-ish up through 89. So it was over like an 8-year period. Because I thought when reading through it, first of all, I was thinking, what is this stream of consciousness nonsense? But then I realized that a lot of it was actually at the time really interesting. Like there's ideas around mankind and the dirt and the garbage pile in the center of the earth, and there's the slobs sitting in front of their TVs who are watching all this battle going on, and kind of parodying on modern society and the laziness of Western culture. And some of it was really timely. And to me, I actually really enjoyed it. Like I enjoyed reading through it as a mindless but not mindless read. Like it took a lot of thinking to kind of follow exactly what was going on, because like with any graphic novel, there's so much behind each frame, right? He'll say something and the drawing will indicate something that unless you're really paying attention, you can miss so much. Um, anyway, it was a long read. It took me a while to get through it, but I really enjoyed it.
I think the important thing there's two key points I think for the Inkle that I always sort of keep in mind when I'm reading that era is the context, like the historic context under which it was written. 60s are turning into like these sleazy 70s, and that's where they grew up, these artists, and then they published these in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So heavy metal was big and this sort of counterculture, and it's a clumsy time. So they're kind of figuring out what it is they're rebelling against still, and what's left after the 60s, after the idealism of the 60s has happened. What's kind of left? Is there something, so that's sort of a rebellion against politics and this sort of sitting in front of the TV all the time, and consumption, waste. So there's something that people are still figuring out at that time, where I think the big influence that comes from the Inkle and these artists of that time period is the aesthetic. I think they created the sci-fi aesthetic that is still copied today. I mean, often people do like to say that this series, or these artists and writers have been copied ever since, and primarily in film, I think. And because it's an aesthetic medium that got glommed on by filmmakers and taken forward. So the aesthetic world building that they kind of established, and that Mobius established, and in these works, and that's where the big influence comes from, and I think it still carries forward to today. And so it's nice for me to read these, because I read it with the same sensibilities I might read something, the sci-fi written at the time as well.
Something to consider with the Inkle is Jodorowsky was supposed to do Dune, and it got called off in the late 70s. I believe it was about the mid-late 70s. They called it off and said, "You're not doing this, man. You're just too crazy." I'm sure his story is different. It seems like the Inkle might have been a way for him to come away from Dune and still enter that world of crazy sci-fi, intergalactic, interspecies, very dark, but it just had a lot of the elements that you would have in Dune.
It's such a fun period in comic book art and writing, and contributed, I think, a lot to sci-fi and fantasy as well. At that time, there's some pretty awesome, like Lord of the Rings inspired prog rock bands that happened in the 70s that if you can Google on YouTube for a good good laugh. So a lot happened, and it wasn't all good, but I think it's really an interesting transition period for me.
Well, I've also been struck with, like you, Tristan, the bar's a little high, and I've been disappointed by a lot of graphic novels and stuff I've read. And it's like Dune, right? The Dune graphic novel after the In-Call and before Sandman was really like, wow, okay, so this is why the In-Call is amazing. Like artistically, it just really stands out above everything else. And I haven't seen anything that compares artistically, visually to the In-Call until I started reading Sandman. And it's interesting to think, right, that they basically follow each other, right? The In-Call was the 80s, Sandman was the 90s. And, very different writers, different kinds of stories and all of that. But as soon as I started reading Sandman, I was like, they're using the visual medium fully, the way and successfully, right? The way that it was in the In-Call. There's just this sort of breadth, the sweep of space used and perspectives and even there's this great moment in the Sandman where you have to turn it 90 degrees, right, and you go into the dream world. It sort of sweeps you around from one story into the dream world by changing by 90 degrees. I love that. And there was some of that too, like not that exactly, but in the In-Call, right, the use of space, the changing of perspectives, the sort of larger sweep and zooming in and out. That was amazing, and it's rare. I don't see that very many other places.
Okay, that was a fun little episode. So, stick around for the next 2 episodes. We've split an interview we had with David Zindel into 2 parts. And what an enlightening conversation we had. And I'm kind of a skeptic, so we went places I just didn't think we'd go. So, join us for that, episode 6 and 7 with David Zindel. Until next time.